Today's daf in Masechet Menachot is daf Lamed Hey, I believe. Yep, 35. And we are in the middle of discussing tefillin, all the different details of tefillin. Today's Gemara is a very enigmatic one. We are actually up to 8 lines from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The ninth line from the top of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Chananel Amar Rav. It says Rav Chananel in the name of Rav. Titura de tefillin halacha Moshe Misinai. The part of the tefillin called the titura is a halacha Moshe Misinai. It's obviously not so clear from this word what titura means. Rashi has an explanation, which is not so clear either. Tosfos has an explanation, but the simplest meaning is that if you think of the tefillin, we're talking here about tefillin, either one, tefillin shel yad or shel rosh. The tefillin are a box, and it's a square box. We're going to learn about that in a minute. That you have 4 parshiot in. The tefillin shel rosh, as we said yesterday, are 4 separate parshiot. Tefillin shel yad is one long one of the 4 sections. But that box sits on a base. And the titura is the base that goes underneath the square that contains the klaf of the tefillin. So Rashi has a whole language about how you're supposed to use the same piece of leather for the tefillin and fold it under to be the base. But the fact that you need a base, that is halacha l'Moshe Misinai, because obviously the Torah doesn't say anything about it. And Amar Abaya says Abaya, the next thing, ma'abarta tefillin halacha l'Moshe Misinai, the ma'abarta is also halacha l'Moshe Misinai. And again, the simplest way to understand ma'abarta is it means a passageway, right? A ma'avar is a passageway. And at the back of the base, there's a hollow area where the straps go through. So the strap has to run through it, and it's not fixed. If you look at tefillin, I was going to show you tefillin. I'm going to do it. Why not? But this is, sorry, I did already put them on. But here, if you have a pair of tefillin, like we have, so the top is the square thing, and you see the shin, which is very important. We're going to talk about that later. But this bottom part is called the titura, and the back, where the strap goes through, is called the ma'avarta. So this part back here. So all of that says the Gemara's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Again, there's other ways to read this, but that's the way Rashi seems to read it. And it's all supposed to be one piece of leather. Continues the Gemara. Amar Abaya mavar tefillin halacha Moshe Sinai. Amar Abaya shin shel tefillin. The shin I just showed you in the tefillin is also halacha Moshe Sinai. And tzarach sheyagia charitz l'makom hatefer. The charitz, the indentations. Again, the simplest way to read this, which is not the most intuitive, is that the tefillin. I'm sorry, shel rosh. I just showed you shel rosh has these indentations. I don't know if you can see it in the camera. You see those indentations? So that's where the 4 parshiot are. And what it means is that the charitz has to go down to the sewing part, to the tefer, where you sew it together in the bottom. So if the charitz has to go all the way down, so you know that there are 4 sections in the tefillin. And where am I? Charitz, the indentation is called the makom tefer. And Rav Dimi min Hardai says you don't need it all the way down. Even to minkar, once you can see that there's a separation, lo tzarich, you don't need to go all the way down. Furthermore, says Abai, another halacha of tefillin is high kilpa de tefillin, the cloth, right? Kilpa means the cloth of the tefillin, the parchment that you actually write it on. You have to check it. Tzarich lemivdike, you got to check it very closely to make sure there's no holes in it, right? Dilma itbe reuta, maybe it has a defect in it. Ubeina ktivat tama veleka, and you need to have ktivat tama. You need to have a full parchment. And if there's any holes in the parchment or or imperfections, that would be a problem in the kashrut of the tefillin. Says Rav Dimi Ardai, you don't really need to check it that closely. Because kol musab badaklei, your quill, your pen that you're writing the cloth with actually checks it. Because if you're writing and you feel an indentation or a hole, you're going to feel it with the pen. So you don't have to be so careful about checking it. If you write it carefully while you're writing it, you basically check it during that time. Continue Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak, the next halacha of tefillin are the straps, right? So we talked about the box, we talked about the top, we talked about the cloth. But the ritzuot, they have to be black. Ritzuot shchorot, ritzuot have to be black. Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. I think Tosfos here is the one who points it out. Yeah, that it does it very clearly says that only the straps have to be black, but the tefillin itself does not have to be black. And so you could have pink tefillin, or Tosfos does not say pink. I'll just say he says white, but you can have light tefillin. We're very careful to make them black. But the only thing that really needs to be black are the strands, or the ritzuot, coming out of the tefillin. And those are halacha Moshe Misinai. They have to be black. Meitvei, I asked but there's a braita that says tefillin and kosher noton ela b'minan. When you tie your tefillin, when you put straps on your tefillin, you should use the same species as the tefillin, meaning the tefillin are made out of leather, so the straps should be made out of leather, right? But says the Braita, we don't really care what color they are. Ben yerukot, ben shchorot, ben levanot, you can have green straps, black, white. But adumot lo yasa, don't make them red, which I guess would be the same problem with pink. Mipnei ginai, that it's embarrassing. There's different explanations, but one is that it looks like you've got like bad skin, and you've got wounds, and you're basically bleeding. You're sloughing your skin, and that's how it got red because the tefillin basically touched your skin, or davar acher, or because of something else. Rashi says something else means a nida. We're worried that maybe there was a nida who had blood in the house, and the tefillin somehow got into that blood. So again, it's a bizarre thing to worry about, but stay far away from red. But you can have straps, it says here, of any color that's not red. So you don't need to have black straps. How can you say the halacha l'mishushin that you have to have black straps? So it seems to be a machloket. Says the Gemara, where am I? We're around halfway down. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda, Maaseh b'talmidosh Rabbi Akiva. In fact, you're so hung up, you're so strict about having to have black straps in your tefillin. But in fact, there was a student of Rabbi Akiva, sorry, who was very fashion conscious, right? Shayakosher tfilav b'loshonot shel tchelet. He used lashonot. Lashonot are leather, right? They're not wool, but they were lashonot. Sorry, I take it back. We are talking about wool. So that the question from this is that the Braita just basically said you have to use the same type of material as the tefillin, meaning leather. And there was a story with the student of Rabbi Akiva who was using tchelet, and tchelet means wool. Basically, he put like yarn essentially around his tefillin that was very beautiful and blue and colorful, and he used it to tie his tefillin. V'amar davar. Rabbi Akiva never stopped him. It was known as the famous student of Rabbi Akiva who wore the blue tefillin, not the tefillin, but the straps. Says the Braita, says Rabbi Yehuda, if Shar Otot Tzaddik Ra'u Talmido v'lo Michabo, could it be that Rabbi Akiva, the tzaddik, saw his student doing this and he never stopped him? Amaloi said, "Hein lo ra'oto." No, for sure, he never saw him. Imra'oto lo haya minicho. If he had known, he wouldn't have let him do it. But you can't say Rabbi Akiva is responsible. Everyone who says, "I'm a student of Rabbi Akiva and I, eat in that place," that means Rabbi Akiva approves of that. So the fact that Rabbi Akiva's student did something is not a proof of anything, unless Rabbi Akiva said it's okay, and Rabbi Akiva never said it's okay. Furthermore, there's another story. Maaseh b'Horkinus. There was a story with Horkinus Beno Shel Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, right? Horkinus, the son of his famous father, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, who gave up everything to learn Torah. His son, Horkinus, Haya Kosher Tfilah b'Loshonot Argaman. He would use strips of purple wool. So he had really, really beautiful straps coming down from his tefillin, but they weren't made out of leather. Lo Amar Lo Davar, and his father never said anything to him. And it's his father. Says Gemara, says the Braita, Efshar Otot Tzadik Ra'ab Beno V'lo Michabo. Could it be that such a righteous person like Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus didn't, saw his son and didn't stop him? The fact that he didn't stop him means he approves of it. Amr lo hein, no, they said absolutely it's possible. Hein, yes, lo ra'oto, he never saw it. Then ra'oto lo yamnicho, if he had seen it, he would have stopped him. So the Braita concludes that all evidence to the contrary, the straps of the tefillin have to be made out of the same species as the tefillin, meaning they have to be leather. But Katani Miyat, but we did learn in the Braita, now that we get to the point that we're bringing it for, we did learn bein yerukot, bein shchorot, bein levanot, that they can be green or black or white. So, and we just said earlier that the Ritzuot, Rabbi Yitzchak said, the Ritzuot have to be black, halacha l'Moshe Misinai. So the Braita says they can be any color except for red, and the Rabbi Yitzchak says they have to be black. Answers the Gemara Lokasha, that's actually not a contradiction because there's two sides to the straps. Kan mi bifnim, kan mi bechutz. On the inside, facing the skin, facing the body, it can be any color you want, but the outside has to be black, and that's how we usually do it. Says the Gemara, but imi bifnim, if you're talking about the inside, why can't it be red? We said it can't be red because people are going to say that, you're bleeding or you're with a nida, but no one's going to see it. It's on the inside. Mike and I, what worry is there about it being embarrassment or something else? Answers the Gemara. Well, because as we all know, the straps turn around. Sometimes they turn around and someone catches a glimpse of the underside. And if it's red, then obviously once in a while you'll see a red flash and you'll see that it's embarrassing for that person. And so therefore you shouldn't have the underside be red. It can be any color, right? It could be white. Many people have their skin colored because it's just not dyed. It could be black, but it can also be blue or any other color. Tana. Says the Braita now, we are around 12 or 14 lines from the bottom. Tfilin merubaot. That tefillin have to be square. And this is again is referring to the top part of the tefillin that contains the parshiot. That is halacha Moshe Misina. They have to be square. We don't have any source for that in the pasuk, but we know it from a halacha Moshe Misina. Says Rav Papa, I want to be very clear with you. What square means is betifran uba'al chisonan. It means in two aspects. Tifran means along the tefer, along the seam, meaning it has to be a right angle, basically, right? So it can't be round at the edge. But you can have a rectangle, for example, that has sharp edges, but that's not good enough. So it has to be both the tefer, both the edge, the corner, and the achasonan, which means the diagonal, meaning the diagonal has to be the same every side. So it has to be a perfect square. Okay, perfect could mean a lot of things, but it has to be a very good square, right? So it's both the corners have to be exactly sharp, Rashi says, and then it has to be a square. Tosis points out that we don't really mention the third dimension. It doesn't have to necessarily be a cube, right? So you have to have a square at the base, but it doesn't say here that the height has to be the same as the two dimensions. And so, according to some opinions, and I think that's how we poskim, but I'm not 100% sure that tefillin don't actually have to be. Um, yeah, that's what Tosa says here, actually. That tefillin don't have to be a cube; they just have to be square at the base, and then they can be taller or shorter than the dimensions of the width and the length. So that is halach Moshe Sinai. Lema misayele. Let's find a Braita that proves this point of Rav Papa, because the Braita says the following: Osa tfilato agula. If you make your tefillin round, sakana, that's dangerous. We learned earlier, it's dangerous because if you have it on your head and you bump into the doorpost, it's going to bang into your head and cause you a big bruise, right? And Aimbo mitzvah, you're not even doing the mitzvah. So well, you're wasting your time because you didn't even do the mitzvah properly. So you see here that round is not kosher. Number of Papa, Sister Papa, well, that's not necessarily exactly proving what I said. Because Matnit and David Be'am Guz, Kiam Guz, the Mishnah or the Braita, which says that it's not a mitzvah, it's a Mishnah actually, is might be talking about where you made him ki amguza. Amguza literally means like a nut, like an eggos, right? Like a nut where basically there's a very sharp point, right? And it comes to a very like a nut, right? And that there, of course, you can imagine that's very dangerous if it hits you on the head. But let's say it was flat on the bottom, but it was rounded in shape. So it wasn't a square, but it was a generally like a flat bottom. That might be kosher according to the Mishnah, and that's what Rav Papa is coming to add, or the Braita is coming to add, and saying that's not kosher. You need to have a perfect square. Again, perfect is to what in dimension? They didn't have lasers back then, so what does perfect mean? But I say close to perfect, and it has to have very square or very sharp edges. Amar Rav Huna, says Rav Huna, sometimes, of course, leather, especially untreated leather or lower quality leather, wears down, right? We've all had leather items that get holes in them. So says Rav Huna, kol zman tefillin, when you're talking about tefillin, kol zman pnei tabla kayemet, as long as the outer face, the surface of the tabla, it literally means the face, right? Or the surface of the tefillin is kayam. It could be thinned out, it could be rubbed away, but as long as it's not ripped, basically, and there's no hole in it, it's ksherot, it's kosher. Rav Chisda said even further, nifseku shtayim ksherot, even if you have two tiny holes in it, it could be kosher. Now, Rashi says a couple of pshatim here. One is that that two holes, meaning that there's four containers in the tefillin, so even if two of them have holes in them, it's okay as long as three don't have it. Shalosh psula. If three of them have holes in them, then it'll be possible, but one or two small holes is not a problem. But says Rava, when we say two holes is not a problem, that even two small holes in the tefillin are kosher, it's only if they're not right next to each other. And again, one interpretation is that it means not, remember, there are four compartments, 1, 2, 3, and 4. They can't be next to each other like 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, because then it looks like a whole area of the tefillin are worn away. But if it's on one side and the other side, say 1 and 4, 1 and 3, then it's kosher because there's a small hole here, a small hole there. It's like when you have a clothing with a hole, right? If there's a hole on one side, hole on the other side, that's a normal thing in my clothing. But if you have holes all together, then it's about to rip apart. So that's one explanation. The other explanation is that it's actually referring to where the holes communicate with each other. So you have holes between the batim, and they could be, if they're separate, then it's okay. But if they're actually touching each other, open on both sides, then it's a problem. But anyways, they only said it shalok zeh shalok keneged zeh, one hole that's not next to the other one, avazeh keneged zeh. If one hole is next to the other, it would be psulot. And now this gets very detailed. Um, 6 lines on the bottom, last word on the line. Even when we said that it's puzzle, if it's one next to each other, that's lo amran ela b'chadita. That's only if it's a new tefillin. If you have new tefillin and you start having holes in them, that's bad news. It means that it's really poor quality. It's going to fall apart. It wasn't treated properly. It wasn't processed correctly, and those tefillin are going to be useless. So get rid of them now and remake them. Avabatikta let lampa. If they're old tefillin, then we're not so worried because then, they've been here for 40 years or 100 years. They obviously passed down tefillin. And of course, over time, you get small holes, but it doesn't mean that the tefillin are going to start falling apart. So it's much more acceptable to have a hole in something that is old, that's old leather, than something that's brand new. Says Abaye to Rav Yosef, okay, so that's a very important halacha. But if you say that's different in old and new, you have to define old and new, right? Hechidamin charita, hechidamin atikta. What's your scientific or halachic definition of new tefillin and old tefillin? Amr lo le. So he said to him, well, it really depends on how how formed the leather is. Because kohecha, remember, as things get older, they get stuck in their shape, right? They don't bend as easily, and when you stretch them apart, they go back to their original state. They have what we call muscle memory, right? But leather memory, it goes back to how it is. Something that's fresher and newer can be shaped much more easily. So said Rav Yosef to Abaya, kohecha kimatle be b'shilcha. If you basically matla means you hold onto the skin, the hide, and you pull it apart, right? Matla means you pull it apart. V'hadr chalim, but then when you let go of it, it returns to its place. That's considered atikta. So if even as you, and obviously every leather has a little bit of give to it. So as you pull it apart, it basically comes apart, it goes back to its natural position. That's considered to be old. It means that it's got its own memory, it's got its own ways, the fibers are arranged in a certain way, and that's considered to be a mature or old pair of tefillin. V'idach, but if it doesn't go back to its exact shape, then it's considered to be charita, then it's considered to be new because it's still pliable. And there, if you start having holes in it, it's obviously a much bigger issue because it means that the whole thing's going to start falling apart. That's one explanation. Inami, turn to Daf Lamed Hey Amud Bet. What it means is actually anywhere where you hang up you pull the straps, right? The mitna are the straps with the tefillin, aitia batre. The tefillin will come with the straps. That's considered to be charita. So what a charita, a new one is where basically the leather, the it's a little bit hard to understand because art tefillin, of course, are very, very firm, as I said yesterday. But back then, imagine the tefillin were much more pliable and weaker. And so basically, if you would pull on the strings, what would happen is that it might rip through the whole tefillin. It would just pull through the whole thing. So if it's a new one, if when you pull the strings, I guess with some force, the tefillin come with them, that's a new one because the house is basically very strong and it will come along with it. The idach, but if it falls apart, so when you pull the string, basically the tefillin head falls out of it, then atikta, that's considered to be an old one. And there, although it's old and it falls apart, it is justifiable to have a hole or two because it means that it's just worn leather, not poor defective leather. Abaya, now a story about tefillin, second line from the top of Lamed Hey Amud Bet. Abaya Haviyativ Kamed Rav Yosef. Abaya was sitting in front of his teacher Rav Yosef, and Ivsiklei would sew the tefillin. And for whatever reason, I guess his straps were very narrow or very thin, and the strap of his tefillin maybe got caught in the chair and it ripped. So not the tefillin, right, but the ritzua coming from the tefillin. So Amalei, so he said to Rav Yosef, Amal the Miktarei, can I put it back? Can I tie it back together? Can I make a knot? Two pieces of string, basically, or leather in this case. Can I tie them together? Amalei and Rav Yosef said no. It says you tie them, implying shtehek shirat tama, that you have to tie them with something that is complete. It has to be nice. It has to be complete. It can't be a knot that's tied up in your tefillin. You have to go and find new ritzuot and put them in your tefillin. Amalei Rav Acha, Rav Yosef, Rav Ashi. Now Rav Acha, the son of Rav Yosef, said to Rav Ashi, later generation, what about Malon Mitzvah Va'ilot Tfir Legav? What if you sew them together, right? So your strap of your tefillin tore. You're not going to do what Abaya recommended, which is just tie it together in a knot. That would not be pretty. It's not complete. But what if you sew it together and you put the stitching on the inside so no one sees it, right? So basically, nobody will know that you sewed it together so it looks pretty and it's nice, maybe that should be okay. And Amar, Rav Ashi said back to him, this is a very interesting use of the terminology, Puk chazim mayamad davar. Go out and see what happens, right? Meaning, I don't have a halacha for you, but this happens all the time, right? People wear tefillin all the time. Again, in those days, I don't think it happens as much today. In those days, they ripped all the time. It was, you were out in the elements, they had weaker leather, they had more exposure. Do people sew their tefillin back together or do they go get new ones? And Rashi says, of course, they don't do it. So the fact that people don't do this and you don't see everybody there with patched up tefillin straps means that you're not supposed to do that. And if your tefillin straps rip, you have to go get new ones. You can't patch up the old ones. So that's the halacha he paskin for him. Now, says Rav Papa, I just want to point out to you, says Rav Papa, that gardume ritzuot ksherot, that the gardume always means the remnants, meaning the strips of that are left behind of the ritzuot are ksherot, right? Meaning that if, let's say your ritzuot basically start, I would say, falling apart, again, not ripping necessarily, but you have a little bit left, right? So, and I think sometimes when things tear, you see the strings coming down. That's usually how we think of gardume ritzuot. You have little strings coming down from the tefillin, that would be kosher, right? And it's not a problem. But says the Gemara of Lav Milti, but that's a mistake. It's not correct. That you can't have little pieces coming down from the tefillin. How do I know that is wrong? Mida Amri b'nei Reb Chia, because the sons of Reb Chia gave a list of rules, and they said gardumet tchelet, that if you have strands of tchelet coming down, so your tzitzit rip, let's say, and the tchelet strands of the tzitzit are just sort of hanging down, and gardume ezov, and you have ezov is from remember they took the grass together to sprinkle the paraduma, right? And let's say you used it up many times and the grass is falling off and you've got basically little small pieces of fiber left behind. Those are ksherim, right? Those are okay. But they were very specific, the Bnei Rabbi Chia. They only mentioned chelet and ezov because hatimhu the tashmishe mitzvah ninu. Those are things that are used for a mitzvah. So the fact that only a little bit is left is okay. Avahacha, but tefillin has a higher status than tzitzit and paraduma because it's tashmishe kedusha ninu. It's something that's used for something of kedusha, and therefore, little remaining parts of it, they will not be enough. If the straps of the tefillin are not substantial enough, it will be possible. Says the Gemara, that is the first thing we've ever heard, that you need to have a minimum size of the straps. Right? From the fact that you're saying that having strings coming down from the tefillin straps is not enough, michlal de itlu shira, that this implies, right, something we didn't know until now, which is that there has to be a minimum size of how long the straps have to be coming down from your tefillin. How much is that? Amar Rami Bar Chama, Amar Reish Lakish, said Rami Bar Chama, the name Reish Lakish, it's to the width of a finger. Again, it's very complicated about exactly what they mean by this, but ad etzba tzreida, right? Until the space of the fingers, etzba tzreida, did I read the wrong way? Yeah. Etzba tzreida, which usually Rashi explains, and we always talk about this, that is the distance basically from the thumb to the index finger. So like this kind of distance where you see my hand. That's etzba tzreida. Rav Kahana machvi kafuf. Rav Kahana would show that in a bent way, meaning it's not necessarily as Rashi explains that it means basically elsewhere explains that it means a little bit different between the second finger, I think, and the third finger. And Rav Ashi machvi pashut, Rav Ashi showed it when it was spread out, so it was basically a much longer distance. So machlok about whether how much of a distance it is, but let's say one tefach or something around that space. So you don't need a very long size, but you need to have a minimum size of straps coming out of your tefillin in order for it to be kosher. And if they start shredding and you only have the shreds left behind, that's not kosher by tefillin, even though it is kosher by tzitzit and by the ezov for the paraduma. Now, where do you put the straps? So that's a big machloket. Rabba, I don't know if it's a machloket, it's different practice. Rabba katar lahe, Rabba would tie together the straps of his tefillin, pashit v'shadilo, and he would take them and he would put them behind him. So he would let the straps go behind him. Rav Acha bar Yaakov katar lahe umatlilu. Acha bar Yaakov would sew them, katar means tie them, right, for ties tefillin, and then he would be matlitle, he would make like a lattice. He would braid them, basically braid the straps, maybe coming down his shirt. It's very interesting, and have them hang that way. And Mar braid deravna would avid kididan. Again, it's funny that the Gemara assumes that there's a didan. The Mar Breiderav did like we do it, which Rashi says means he let them fall on his stomach, the way most people now wear the straps of their tefillin. So there was all kinds of different practices about what you do with the straps, and it seems like it's not ma'akev. You can do what you want, but the practice that we do, at least the Gemara says we do, and I think most do today, is they put them in front of them, just hanging down. Now, continues the Gemara, we're around halfway down Lamed Hey Amabet. The next detail of tefillin that we learn are the ksharim, the ties. So says Rav Yehuda Breder of Shmuel Bar Shila Mishmei Rav, Kesher shel tefillin, the way you tie the tefillin is halacha Moshe Misina. It's halacha Moshe Misina, as you may know. If you don't know, I'll say it. Basically, we try to spell out the word Shaddai, right? Shin Daled Yud, the Shem of Hashem, with the tefillin. The shin is imprinted on the side of the tefillin shalrosh. The shin is part of the tefillin. The dalid comes from the tie of the tefillin shalrosh, and the yud comes from the tie of the tefillin shalyad. Okay, so when you make the knot, if you look at tefillin, you look at the knot of the tefillin shalrosh, it looks like a shin, and if you look at the knot of the tefillin shalyad, it looks like a yud. Okay, so I'm sorry, I said it wrong. In the tefillin shalosh, the knot looks like a dalid, and the tefillin shayad, the knot looks like a yud. Okay, so that doing it that way is halacha leMoshe Misinai. Amar Rav Nachman says Rav Nachman, but I just want to point out the noyehem, the pretty part of it, right? Meaning the dyed side, which is black, libar, that should be on the outside, which is similar to what we said earlier. But we want to give off our best look, right? And Rav Ashi Haviyatav Kamei Mar Zutra. Now Rav Ashi was once sitting in front of Mar Zutra, and he was learning or doing whatever they were doing. And Itapcha le Ritzua de Tefillin, his Tefillin Ritzua got turned around, so that the black side, which is supposed to be facing outwards, was facing inwards. Rashi is really referring to not just the tefillin, the strap, but the knot actually got turned around. And Amar Le, and so Rav Mar Zutra said to Rav Ashi, L'savrle marva noyem lebar. You don't hold of what Rav Nachman said, that the pretty part of the knot has to be facing outwards because your knot is facing inwards. And I said, no, lava daiti was totally unintentional. I didn't do that way on purpose. My tefillin moved around when I was jumping up and down or something, and I never turned them around. But you're right, I made a mistake, and it's not supposed to be that way. So it wasn't on purpose. Continues to Gemara at the pasuk that we have, towards the end of Devarim. It says, "Ra'u kol amei haaretz," all the nations of the land will see, Kishem Hashem nikra alecha, that the name of Hashem applies to you or is called for you, v'yar'u mimeka, and they will be afraid of you or fearful of you, right? And so, where Tanya says the Braita, what is this pasuk referring to? Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol Omer Il Tefillin Shebarosh. Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol said that. Where are people going to see that Shem Hashem Nikra Eilecha? Because you're going to wear on your head what are called Tefillin Shebarosh, so that basically you can have the Shem Hashem, or at least showing, similar to I guess what we call Yarmulke, but this is for Tefillin. The Tefillin would be the name of Hashem, showing off that you remember Hashem, you're conscious of Hashem, and that Hashem is part of your everyday life. The pasuk, this is the pasuk that we're going to have in a little bit in Kitisa. It says, "Bahasiroti et kapiv or iti et achorai." Hashem says to Moshe, right? You can go into the tzur, into the rock, and I'll take off my kapi, right? I'll take off literally kapi means my hand, but I'll move my hand, and you will see my achorai. You'll see my back. What is that referring to? Amar Rav Chana bar Bizna, Rav Shimon Chasida, Nilamed, what Hashem showed Moshe was Herelo Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe. Kesher shel tefillin. Hashem showed Moshe the knot of the tefillin, which if you're wearing tefillin in the back of your head, you would see the knot of the tefillin. This, of course, Kabbalistically, you can talk about this till the end of times. But, what does it mean, God wearing tefillin? What does it mean, Moshe looking at the knot of the tefillin? What is the meaning? I will leave that all for those that I don't, you have much to talk about in your Farbrengen. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, just let's talk technically. Now we're off of what Hashem's tefillin look like. Kesher shel tefillin tzarich she'lamala. It's really important that the knot of the tefillin of the shalrosh, which is done in the back, right, is above meaning not on your neck, but on your head. Because sometimes people wear their tefillin, they wear it too low. The knot goes basically on the neck. You don't want that knot to be on the neck. It has to be further up on the head. Kadeshu Yisrael lemala v'lo lamata. It's a symbol that Bnei Yisrael are above, not below. So the higher you keep that knot, the more symbolically it's valuable, showing that basically basically, you have you're high, you're higher up. V'tzarach she'klape panim, now it should be facing your face. Now remember, it's on the back of your head, but the middle of the back of your head is where your face is, and not on the side. So Rashi explains the point is it shouldn't be the knot shouldn't be under your ear or something. Shekidei she'yisrael lifanim v'lo lachar, to give a symbol that we're facing forward. That this tefillin is a symbol that we are high, it's high up on our head, and we're going forward, high and mighty going forward. That's the siman of the tefillin. Okay, so that is all the things we have to do about the knots. Let's do a little bit more. We've got plenty of time. It says the Gemara now, 8 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Bidre, unusual name. Shmuel bar Bidre, in the name of Rav, said, and some say Amar Rabbi Acha Aricha Amar Rav Huna, that this was actually Rabbi Acha, the tall one. Aricha means the tall, right? The long one, who said in the name of Rav Huna. Va'amrilan, some say it was Rav Menachot Amar Shmuel. So it's very interesting, right? Because it's a statement that either comes from Rav Huna, or from Shmuel in the name of other people who were all Amuraim in the same period. Rav Huna was a little bit later. He was a student of Rav, but the first and second generation in Bavel. Somehow one of them said that tefillin, question is, when you put on tefillin, me'ematay mevarech aleim. When do you make the bracha for putting on tefillin? This is a very practical question. If you put on tefillin, said whoever answered the question, Shmuel or Rav Huna or Rav, nishat hanachatan. From the moment you put the tefillin on, that's when you put them on, not before you put them on. But the time you put the tefillin on is when you make the bracha. Eini says, where is that true? But we have a principle, 4 lines in the bottom. For Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Kol ha-mitzvot kulan, all mitzvot that are mitzvot that you do, mivarech alehem over l'asiyatan, you make the mitzvah before you do it. So what do you mean that you make the bracha when you put them on? You should make the bracha before you put them on, while you're holding them in your hand, like mitzvah of Chanukah or most other mitzvot, lulav or etc. So what do you mean? Why do you do it when you put them on? So Abaye and Rav explained that no, because there's a process in putting them on. Because first you put the tefillin on and then you tie them. So what he was saying was that mishat hanacha, from when you put them on, va'ad shat kshira, until you actually tie them, that is the time that you're supposed to make the bracha. So because it's basically a process of putting on the tefillin, and the mitzvah really is tying the tefillin, so then you basically make the bracha after you put them on, before you tie them, and this is how we do it. I think we should stop here because if we keep going, we'll probably do half of tomorrow's daf. Which wasn't a terrible thing, but I want to do it tomorrow. So the Gemara, this is where we're right in the middle because, as you may know, that we make two mitzvot, we make two brachot on tefillin. We make a bracha la'aniach tefillin and a bracha al mitzvat tefillin. And so the Gemara is going to get to why we have two brachot. We haven't got there yet. We just started off the first bracha, which according to all these Amoraim, Shmuel and Rav Huna, is made after you put them on, but before you tie them. So at the moment you put them on. We'll stop here at the top word of Daf Lamed Vav. Shavua Tov, everyone. I'm going to be away next Shabbat, but I'm going to record the Dapim, God willing. So,
Are you teaching tomorrow?
not that I know of.
Okay. All right.
I'll put in the chat if I am, but I don't think so.
All right.
Okay, Shabbat Tov.
Shabbat Tov.